My name is Ariel, and I work at the Creston-Dement Public Library. But I'm also a high school student, so I decided to do a series of videos about tips and tricks that I wish I had known before I got into middle school or high school. Today's topic is note-taking. As always, I'm going to remind you that many things are different for each person, so I'm going to share some tips that worked for me, but they may not work for you, so I encourage you to try these and other things to see what works best for you. To begin with, I want to stress the importance of taking notes because I used to think it wasn't that big of a deal. But note-taking is actually very important for remembering information. Now, today I'm going to be specifically talking about when you're taking notes and they're completely from scratch. So your teacher doesn't hand you something that already has some things written, but you just have to have, a blank piece of notebook paper and you just have to take notes on your own. A good tip that I have is to use different colors if that is possible for you. So I had this friend when I was a sophomore in high school that used to come to class with a bunch of different colored pens, and she would take her notes in these brightly colored pens, and she would switch between colors, and I was like, "Why are you doing this? What is your system?" And she was like, "Well, I use this color for this type of information and this color for this type of information." And I really took a look at her notes, and I was like, they were so organized and they had such a pattern, and it made it very easy when she was reviewing. So I decided to also get some colored pens, and I developed my own system, pretty different from the one that she uses, but it's very useful when I'm taking notes. But if you don't have this option, that is completely fine. I also would like to note that highlighters is also very useful when you're taking notes. The main reason I like using different colors when I'm taking notes is so that certain pieces of information can be stressed, and I can think, okay, this is very important. And it also helps when I'm going back and reviewing my notes, because then I can just take a look and I'm like, oh, hey, I already have this stuff highlighted, or I already have this stuff written in a different color, so I know, hey, this is something that I should probably review. This is something that's probably going to be on the test that I should know. And the other stuff is maybe just some other important information that, I can take in, but I don't have to remember as deeply as the other stuff. But if colors aren't an option for you, you can always underline stuff, you can put stars next to stuff, you can circle stuff, box stuff, whatever you need to help you remember which pieces of information are super important. That's what I used to do. So another thing that I'd like to talk about when it comes to note-taking is the margins are your friend. When you have a piece of notebook paper and it has the red line on the left, and then it has the faint red line where the red line is on the other side, the section outside of those is the margins. I always thought, oh, why would I want to put stuff in there? That's messy. But it's okay, because there are certain things where you'll write your notes and then something later may be connected, and you may want to put it in that section as well. So if you don't have room, you can write in the margins. One thing that I think is important is to have a separate section or a separate page possibly for formulas, for definitions, or for timelines and dates and things like that. Just those other things that you may need to refer to quickly and you don't want to have to scan through all of your notes. But I would also recommend putting those things in your notes still, but finding a way to kind of make sure that those are definitely defined. So that may be, like I said, you may want to highlight it, you may want to circle it or underline it or something, so you just remember that, hey, this is something important. This is something that I want to remember. Use any sort of diagrams that may help you. A diagram, is something you can draw to help you get like a visual aid of what the information that you're learning is. And I often found myself using these. My last tip for right now is to definitely use outside resources. So you definitely can like look up things online and add them to your notes later, or anything that may help. Very few teachers will collect your notes and look at them, and if they do, they're often just going to make sure that you were taking notes on things relevant to the class. But if your teacher requests that you take notes, I would just check with them beforehand and say, hey, are you going to collect these notes? And if they're not, then just remember that your notes can be as messy as possible. I often find that when I'm writing very quickly, my handwriting does tend to get very messy, but it's okay as long as I can read it. Now, for the next part, I want to split up note-taking into two distinct categories, because I often find that if I'm taking notes, I'm either taking notes from a textbook or I'm taking notes from a lecture, or like in class when your teacher is talking, So, I'm first going to start with taking notes from a book. The first thing that I have to say, obviously, don't plagiarize. But there are times that I find it's very difficult to rewrite things in my own words. In that case, it is okay to write down whatever your book says in your notes. But the important part is that although it's okay to write what your book says in your own notes, never claim that those words are your own words, because those didn't come from your head. Those came from somebody else's head who then put it into a book. So in order to do this, I always, write down that this is specifically from the book, whether you're using, quotation marks around it, or I will often put I'll underline it, or I'll put stars around it, so then I remember, hey, this is not my words, and I should never claim that they're my own words. And I often put a page number, and this goes beyond just if you're writing something that came out of the book, but anything, if you don't want to write out, full details of a certain thing, you may want to put a page number so that if you need to go back and look for information on that certain topic, then you know where to find it. Another thing about taking notes from a book, there are many different types of note-taking, but I find that outlining is very useful for books because books are often already split into sections. You'll have, the chapter, and then you'll have a different section, and within that section there's usually little subsections. And I often find that it's very useful to use those as your guide through your notes.
Hello, I'm popping in to say that I will be putting some links at the top of the description with some other good note-taking methods. The only one that I really described in this video is outlining because that's the one that I'm comfortable with and that's the one that I use a lot. But I want to make sure that you do have other options, so that's why I will be providing those links, so make sure to check them out.
Now I'm going to switch over to taking notes from a lecture. So I find that taking notes from a lecture is very difficult at first because you have to develop that skill of writing things while you're listening to what the teacher is saying. Generally, I would say you kind of have to decide what information is important and that you need to write down and what information is not important. I've found, especially when it comes to things like definitions, you should wait until your teacher finishes talking to make sure you get the full understanding before writing it down in your notes. This can also help so that you can write something shorter and then continue listening. If your teacher has a slideshow or PowerPoint presentation, that can really help you determine what things are important enough to write down in your notes. Some teachers may even be willing to send you the slides after class. In some classes, you may find that you are taking notes from a book, but then you are also taking notes in a lecture. In this case, definitely make sure you've taken book notes first, so then you don't have to write as much notes in class. If you have a class where you take both book notes and lecture notes, then taking book notes first may also help you know what things you need to ask your teacher questions about, because maybe the book didn't explain them that well. If you miss something that your teacher says that you think is very important to write down, don't freak out. Just leave a space for it in your notes, and then after class, see if you can ask a classmate, hey, do you know what the teacher said after this but before this? One of my teachers recommended that you have a separate page for terms that you don't know or terms that you may have already covered in class but you don't remember what they mean, so then later you can look them up, whether in your notes or online, to just see and make sure you know what they mean for next time. Anyway, thank you so much again for watching this video, and I will see you next time.